Hey you guys! So today's video is a testimony video regarding leaving the Islamic faith and becoming a Christian. And I really want to highlight a couple of different things that I went through in my upbringing, which led me to the point of deciding that it was not the faith that I wanted to follow. And I believe ultimately is what led me to find God. So I'm just going to jump in. I'm going to break it up into a few little parts just so you can kind of get a sense of it. And then if there's certain areas where you're not really all that interested in watching, you can just skip over to the next part. So let's go. Okay, so in terms of personal history, my parents came from Syria and Lebanon, and they came to this country as refugees, and the primary religion practiced there is Islam. So when they got into Canada, there were still some traditional elements to the way my family, lived. My mom and dad still were praying more frequently in the traditional sense. Definitely saw, more references to the faith in the early part of my life. And at a certain point, it became evident that my parents were kind of disconnecting from the belief system. And so we started to experience, I guess, a more like liberal, open minded upbringing or opportunity to kind of just, you know, live without the types of constraints that the religion initially placed on them. My extended family, however, continued living very much in alignment with the traditions of those countries. And I guess one thing that's important to point out is that, like, when you leave a country and there's specific traditions that take place there, oftentimes what happens is there's kind of like a freeze, right? So we get kind of stuck in a particular year and how everything is being practiced within that year. So while there might be evolution that's taking place while you've left, the person's point of reference is always going to be like when I left in 1980 or when I left in 1964. So this was very much what was exemplified in my family's relationship to the country and relationship to how it was being practiced, is they were still practicing it from what they had left, even though the countries were still evolving within this time. So this is important because the way that my extended family operated was very strict, to the degree that it became almost like, we couldn't ever talk about something different or, kind of have a different opinion or something like that around it. It became a very contentious kind of subject, right? And it was like the only option that we had, really, was to do that. And there was a period of time where I explored that, which I'm going to talk about that a little bit more later on. But I just want to give you a sense that there was not like an open-minded space for conversation. There wasn't an opportunity to say I disagree. It was like, this is what we've learned, this is what we came from, and this is the expectation of what you will practice, even if there was some, relinquishing of the strictness of it in my home. It was still like, this is the box that you have to exist within for religion. So I did actually try to fit into this box for a period of time. I found myself naturally wanting to fit in with my family members, wanting to connect with them. And I took opportunities sometimes to ask questions and to try and learn about what it is they believe and why they believe what they believe. And it was something that, was very encouraged within my family. And I found that was very reinforced for this, like heavily reinforced for this. Now, I was watching at the same time a lot of my younger family members, like at quite young ages, they were wearing hijabs and going into like traditional attire, more or less, and kind of continuing to perpetuate what their parents had taught them. My parents were still quite liberal around how they approached things. And in fact, I found that they sometimes would have a reaction to me when I would try to seek alignment with my extended family around practice. So there was a time even that I put on a hijab from my cousins, they had put it on me. And I remember coming downstairs and my mom was horrified and she like ripped it off my head and she was like, "You are not going to be wearing this." So I think there was still definitely an element of protectiveness that my parents had. And now I can likely see that that was God's hand on me, trying to keep me from being indoctrinated in this belief system and seeking their approval. But at the time, I found myself very conflicted. Like my extended family is really, very interested in this and very committed to this. And yet my mom and my dad just seemed to be walking in a different direction. So I eventually conceded and followed my parents. So when it came to doctrine, I just want to be clear that there were certain things that were taught to me at a young age around, the Quran and around the practices. And I found myself oftentimes questioning what was being spoken to me because it seemed extremely harsh and scary most of the time. And I couldn't understand really like why that was what was being communicated to me about this supposed God that created us, right? So, one of the examples that I learned about within my upbringing was that as a woman, if I did not cover my hair, I was told that if I don't do that, I would go to hell and God would hang me from my hair and like I would be tortured for the rest of my life. So this was very motivating, obviously. I was, you know, scared that this was who God, is. And I found myself, that was around the time where I was trying to kind of follow a little bit what was going on. And my parents, I had heard this from my extended family many times, but my parents, you know, didn't really explain anything in the Quran to me too deeply, but it was more about rituals and practices. So it was like, you have to pray 5 times a day and you're fasting, a couple times a year. And it's just like there's an element of modesty in the way that you dress and the way that you live your life. So there were some things that, were really deeply still embedded within my parents' lives. But still, I found myself just kind of really questioning how is this in any way going to, you know, encourage me to live differently? Like it's just terrifying and it's scary. And I had this extremely disconnected feeling from whoever this God was that they were talking about. So there was another thing that was frequently discussed within my experience, like from their doctrine, was around doing good to go to heaven. And this was very heavily reinforced within my upbringing. I heard it a lot. I was told often that I needed to do good to people because I would receive rewards in heaven. I heard about all of these rewards that they would get. I heard about all of these. I remember even hearing about like all of these women that men would get in heaven. So it was like, I found it very strange, like, because there was something inside of me that knew intuitively. I want to say that is that like there were like little secrets that God hid inside of me that made me like always unable to really digest it and accept it. And I really believe this is kind of how God intuitively makes us, is that like we have some knowledge intuitively of his character. So when I would hear that, like to be good to people for reward, I was like, but I don't think that makes any sense at all. Like, how could the only motivator for goodness be reward? I wanted to do good because that is the right thing to do. So to hear this was a point of contention for me frequently. And it was something that was always emphasized. Well, I'm doing this for reward. I'm doing this for heaven. I'm doing this because in the future, when I go to heaven, these are the things that I'm going to get. And I couldn't get on board with that. I really couldn't. And I found myself around this time actually walking in a very different direction where I kind of like relinquished at some point any prospect of religion. I even had tried reading the English translation of the Quran, and I just found myself feeling empty and like dissatisfied with what I was reading, and it just did not resonate with me. And the people who were probably in general the worst to me were people who really were very indoctrinated with this belief system. So I could not understand how I was being told to be a good person, and yet I was surrounded by people that were extremely mean and were, in some elements, extremely harsh and judgmental and condemning. And I was like, this just something about this like was seen very hypocritical to me, and I could not really get on board with it. So as I said, I walked in a completely different direction where I kind of went to the point of being like an agnostic, where I was like, you know what, I like this and I like that from this religion, and this one's pretty good. And I like what Buddhists say here, and I like what this says here, and I walked away from it completely. So, around the time that I was starting to ask questions and really starting to seek God, and it was like there's this drawing that kind of happens when the Lord is pulling you into his like into awareness of who He is, right? So He's drawing you by His Spirit, and I knew like at a level I had never felt in my life. I knew I had to find God, but I had no idea who God is. Sorry guys, was past tense, present. I had no idea. And so I'm thinking, okay, the only religion I know is Islam, but something about it just never felt right, and I just could not understand why it didn't feel right. And for the first time in my life, I met this person. And I remember there was something about him that was so odd. And I don't mean this in a disrespectful or rude way, but I mean like there was something very peculiar, which is a biblical term, about him. And what was peculiar about this person was he was kind. He is kind. But that was what I noticed in that moment. There was a patience, there was a kindness, there was a gentleness, there was a loving nature in this person. And I remember thinking, I never met a man like this. The men that I knew, especially from the Islamic faith, were horrible. I'm sorry. Like I don't know how else to say it. They were mean, they were chauvinistic, they were misogynistic, they were disrespectful, they had assaulted me on numerous occasions in different ways. They frequently harmed me. And I was just coming from a place of being very disgusted by men, in all honesty. And I really didn't like the male gender very much. And so I see this man and he's very odd. I'm like, what is wrong with this guy? Like, why does he act like this? And this was the first time where I actually had the opportunity to see what in Galatians they discuss is the fruits of the Spirit. So I'm not going to digress too much from this testimony, but to actually see goodness, kindness, patience, self-control, to see those qualities in action as a demonstration of God in them. So at the same time, my friend was inviting me to church, right? Like, coincidentally. And I had been to like Catholic experiences before, like masses and stuff like that. I worked within Catholic agencies before, and they were always mutually dead to me, like boring, flat. There was no life. Kids were falling asleep, and it just like it was just really uninteresting and unengaging. And So I remember thinking like, I already been to a church. Like, I don't really need to go to one. But she insisted, and it was my actual first time being in a Christian church. So I'm not going to say to you Catholicism and Christianity are the same either. They're not. They're very different practices, and I don't actually believe that people who are Catholic have a real relationship with the Holy Spirit in Christ. So, I know that's kind of a big statement, but I'm still saying it. So, I go to this church, and I remember for the first time in my life actually experiencing something spiritually that connected me to my creator. And I did not know this or experience this before, but it was something that the only way that I could actually explain it is like stillness. And it was like a peace that transcended all of my understanding, which is also very biblical, okay? Like, this is how they describe God in the Bible, that he gives peace. And I had never experienced peace. I had never felt this peace. It was like everything in my brain, in my heart, just stopped moving. And it was like, okay, this is something different about this. And as I was introduced to more of God's people, the more I saw those fruits of the Spirit too. The more I saw people who were patient and people who were kind and people who were loving. And when I heard, kind of like the premise of the New Testament that God is teaching in terms of like commandments, where he's saying, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Love your neighbor as yourself, to bless those who curse you, to love your enemies. And if you read the Bible, there are no conditional statements that say things like that. They don't say like, do good to people and love people so you get millions of dollars or 5 virgins in heaven. They didn't talk about that at all. They actually discussed that it is right. What good is it to you if you do good to those who like you? Do good to those who don't do good to you. So I'm saying that it blew my mind. It blew my mind to see people who actually demonstrated these characteristics that I feel like I know intuitively now as a Christian. These are demonstrations and examples of God's character. Okay? So when I'm learning about this Allah, and I'm learning about this God that they're referencing so frequently, and I am seeing people who don't know their doctrine at all, which is something I've had to learn now, is that like most people who will share with you the doctrine of Islam, they actually don't know it. Oftentimes they're actually saying what they've heard other people say. So it would be like people who have taught them in the past, and they'll say, well, this is what it says that. But in general, if you're like, okay, well, show me where it demonstrates that Islam loves women. Show me in your scriptures the way that women are loved and cared for. And you'll actually see embedded in the doctrine hatred towards women repetitively. Slavery they talk about. They talk about all types of misogynistic concepts. There's inconsistencies within it. They are not even constantly thematically the same. It's been revised on many different occasions. Like if you even look at the countries that really ingest Islam as their main form of doctrine, that is where women's quality of life is the worst. They say this religion is about peace, but if you actually again look at the doctrine, it's peace for those who share your religious beliefs, not for those who don't. A lot of those people, they might be well-intentioned, and I'd like to think that when people are sharing that, it's because they personally don't ascribe to that belief. They don't agree in being harmful to others, and perhaps that it's just something that kind of aligns with them more on a personal level than on a theological level. But I don't want to abide by a doctrine that I can't be in alliance with. What sense does it make for me to follow a particular religion and I disagree with it? Fundamentally, I disagree with so much of it, but I don't want to tell you how much I disagree with it. I would rather just continue doing it and only take what I like about it. I agree with this wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly. Is it always easy? No. Are there always examples in my life where I say to myself, hey, I can't wait to do that? No. I don't always like fasting. I don't always like praying. I don't always like blessing those who curse me. I don't always like doing it. But fundamentally, there is something inside of my value system that agrees wholeheartedly with this. I agree with what it says. I stand by it 100%. Yes, you can ask me about anything in here and I will say, I know, but I'm not God. I didn't create these laws. I didn't create these things. But fundamentally, the inherent premise of Christianity is you are not saved by your own works. So just like in Islam, they're saying to you like, well, you follow these rules and then you will be a good person and then you might go into heaven based on following the rules. Whereas I am saved by faith in Christ. Guys, this is such good news. No one can boast. No one can say, hey, well, I'm so good because I've done all of these things and that's why God saved me. No, contrary to that, Christianity teaches that I am saved by faith, not by anything I've done. I did not deserve it. I did not earn it. I didn't do anything to be better than anybody else. And being a Christian doesn't make me better than anyone else. I want to be really clear about that. And I say this also to my Christian brothers and sisters. It does not matter what we say or do. It does not change our inherent value to God. So I am saying this because in all honesty, I am heartbroken now when I see the people that I love so dearly abiding by a doctrine that oftentimes they don't really know very well and are often living in opposite to what they're even saying, but because they want to continue connecting to the religion, they just base it on you not knowing it. So they are just hoping you're not going to know about all the different violent descriptions that are in there, or perhaps even just the contrary words about what is actually happening on this earth. Because there are a lot of things that they say that are inaccurate, like just completely inaccurate. And I just mean about the description of the universe and the world. So I'm not saying this because I'm like, hey, I hope this is offensive to people and I hope I really upset you by saying this. I am saying this because I personally struggled so much to tell the people that I loved why I felt the way I felt. And I realized as time has gone on, I've realized that there was just something inside of me that God had placed. I would never connect to that. I could not connect to that because I'm his child. And by being his child, I'm always going to want to seek the words of my Father. I am not going to want to take some kind of false idol and then try to place that because it looks like I'm being more strict or I'm being more disciplined. But a really good test of someone's quote unquote discipline, I have to say, is the fact of like how we treat each other, right? So like I can say right now, like I'm very, very disciplined, guys. I'm sitting here telling you about Jesus, but then I'm going to go out in my life and act in an undisciplined manner with every single person that I interact with. That has to be something that we are resisting and we are looking at. I should not just be going out doing whatever it is I say, think, or want, and then saying like, well, I'm still a good person because I do X, Y, and Z. But you are cruel to people. You are judgmental to people. You are extremely mean. You think you're better than other people. You disrespect the values and the beliefs of the people you live and work beside. I don't want to ascribe to a belief system like that. I want to do good because God called me to do good. And I want to do good not because it's going to earn me anything, but because I want to demonstrate his character. Because I want people to see through me him. And it's really hard. Can I just be honest with you? It is so much easier to follow rules and say like, I'm going to do this and this at this time and at that time, and I'm going to fall with this way. It is so different when you are not doing it with some kind of reward system that you think you're going to earn later on, and you're actually doing it because that is how you exemplify his character. That's it. And you suffer for doing good. Anyways, I don't want this to be too long, but I really hope this was helpful for somebody and encouraging for someone else. And yeah, if you guys like this content, feel free to, leave a message or leave some kind of comment and like let me know if you guys like this stuff, and I can definitely do more. So anyways, have a great day. Bye.